Clara Morgan stood under the gray morning sky, the drizzle quietly soaking her umbrella. Seattle had a way of feeling lonely, even when it wasn't supposed to. The world around her was alive, cars passing, people rushing, yet she felt still, as if life had slowed just for her. Her old silver Honda sat in the driveway, silent again. The engine had refused to start, just like it had 2 days ago. She sighed, rubbing her arms for warmth. Daniel, her husband, had already left for work before sunrise. He had deadlines, meetings, and projects that always seemed to matter more than the quiet moments between them. She tried calling for a ride, but no one picked up. Her best friend, Melissa, was out of town, and the buses were always late in this weather. The art gallery she worked at was only 15 minutes away by car, but walking there in the rain felt impossible. Clara took a deep breath, wondering if she should just give up and call in sick. Just then, a car slowed near the curb. It was a sleek black sedan, too new, too elegant for this old street. The window rolled down and she saw a familiar face. Clara. Need a ride? It was Ethan Blake. She remembered him from one of Daniel's company dinners last year. He worked in Daniel's department, quiet, well-spoken, with that effortless kind of charm that never tried too hard. She hadn't seen him since that night, but she remembered his smile. "Oh, Ethan. Hi," she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" He gave a small smile. "Heading downtown. You're soaked. Hop in, I'll give you a lift." Clara hesitated. She wasn't the type to accept rides from anyone, especially from one of her husband's coworkers. But the rain was getting heavier and her coat wasn't helping. "Are you sure? I don't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble," Ethan said simply, unlocking the door. "Get in before you freeze." She got in. The warmth of the car felt like a small luxury. The seats smelled faintly of leather and something clean like cedar wood. Ethan turned on the heater, and soft music played from the speakers, a piano melody that filled the silence between them. "Thank you," Clara said, brushing her damp hair back. "Anytime," Ethan replied. "You work downtown, right?" She nodded. "The White Stone Gallery." "Ah, the art place near the park. I've walked by it a few times." Clara smiled faintly. "It's small, but it keeps me busy." Ethan nodded, his eyes still on the road. The rain drummed lightly on the windshield, making the world outside look blurred and far away. For a while they drove in comfortable silence. Clara watched the gray city pass by the bridges, the coffee shops, the people rushing with umbrellas. It was strange how peaceful she felt sitting beside someone she barely knew. "So, how's Daniel doing at work?" she asked, trying to fill the quiet. Ethan gave a small laugh. "Overworked as usual. He's one of the few people who still answers emails at midnight." "That sounds like him," Clara said softly. "He's always working." Ethan's tone shifted just slightly, gentle but thoughtful. "That must be hard sometimes." Clara looked out the window. "It's not hard, just quiet." He glanced at her but didn't say anything right away. The hum of the tires on wet asphalt filled the pause. After a few minutes, Ethan spoke again, his voice lower now. "You know, Daniel talks about you sometimes?" She turned, surprised. "He does." "Yeah," Ethan said. "At lunch or after meetings. He says you're the calm one in the house. The artist who keeps his world balanced." Clara smiled, though her chest felt heavy. "That's kind of him." "But," Ethan added after a pause, "sometimes it sounds like he forgets what he has." Clara looked at him, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I just mean, people get caught up in work. They stop seeing the small things that make life feel alive. And when that happens, even the strongest connections can fade without anyone noticing." The words hung in the air. Clara turned away, pretending to look at the raindrops racing down the window. The truth in his words hit deeper than she expected. Ethan cleared his throat softly, his tone shifting again, careful, lighter. "Sorry, that probably sounded strange. I didn't mean to get so deep this early in the morning." "It's okay," Clara said quietly. "You're not wrong." He looked at her for a moment, just long enough for her to feel seen. Really seen. It was an unfamiliar feeling, someone looking at her not out of obligation. But out of understanding, they crossed the Aurora Bridge, where the city opened up beneath them, the gray water reflecting the skyline. Ethan's voice broke the silence again, softer this time. "Daniel's lucky," he said. Clara blinked. "Lucky." "To have you," he said simply. "Some people never meet someone who still believes in love, even when it feels one-sided." Her breath caught slightly. She wasn't sure what to say. It wasn't flirting, not really, but something in his tone felt intimate in a way. Words rarely did. She forced a small smile. "That's very poetic, Ethan." He smiled back, eyes still on the road. "Guess I've had too much coffee." They laughed softly, and for a moment, the tension eased. But beneath that laughter, Clara felt something stir inside her. Not attraction, not desire, but awareness. Awareness of how invisible she had begun to feel in her own marriage. The car pulled up outside the gallery. Ethan parked carefully by the curb. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the world washed clean. "Thank you for the ride," Clara said, reaching for the handle. Ethan nodded. "Any time, really?" She opened the door but paused when he spoke again, quietly, almost like he didn't mean to say it out loud. "If I were him, I'd never let you stand in the rain alone." Clara froze. She turned to look at him. His expression wasn't bold or suggestive, it was sincere, even a little sad. Her heart beat faster, not from excitement, but from something she couldn't name. No one had spoken to her like that in years. Not with longing. Not even with admiration, but with genuine care. The words sank deep. Somewhere beneath the layers of routine and tiredness she had built around herself, she wanted to say something back, maybe to change the subject. Maybe to ask him what he meant, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she managed a quiet, "Goodbye, Ethan." He nodded once. "Goodbye, Clara." She stepped out into the soft drizzle, closing the door gently behind her. The car pulled away slowly, its red taillights fading into the mist. Clara stood there for a moment, staring at the street. Feeling the rain touch her face, she should have felt guilty. But she didn't. What she felt instead was confusion. And a strange warmth that scared her as she walked toward the gallery. She couldn't stop hearing his voice echoing in her mind. "If I were him?" Inside, the gallery smelled of fresh paint and coffee. The quietness of the room felt different that day. She hung her coat, sat by the window, and watched people passing outside. She tried to distract herself with her work, arranging a display, adjusting the light on a painting, but her thoughts kept circling back to that short drive. Why had his words affected her so much? Maybe because they reminded her of what was missing, not grand gestures, but small attention, small warmth, small moments that once existed between her and Daniel. At noon, Daniel texted her, "Sorry, can't make dinner tonight. Meeting ran late. Love you." She stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "It's okay. Be safe." But even as she sent it, she felt a quiet ache in her chest. Not anger, not disappointment, just emptiness. Later that evening, as she locked up the gallery, the rain started again. She looked out at the dark street, half expecting to see the black sedan waiting there. Of course, it wasn't. Still, small part of her wished it were Dot. As she walked home under her umbrella, Ethan's words echoed again and again in her head. "If I were him, I'd never let you stand in the rain alone." That sentence, simple, almost careless, had opened a door she didn't even know existed. A door that led somewhere she wasn't ready to go, and deep inside. Clara knew that her life, her quiet routine, her fragile balance would never feel quite the same again. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, listening to the soft hum of the rain against the window, watching the shadows stretch across the ceiling. Ethan's words wouldn't leave her mind. "If I were him, I'd never let you stand in the rain alone." It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Calm, sincere. Like he saw something in her that even Daniel didn't notice anymore. She turned over, glancing at the empty space beside her. Daniel was still awake in the study downstairs, the faint blue glow of his laptop spilling through the hallway. That light had become part of her nights, a quiet reminder of how far apart they had grown. The next morning, he barely looked up from his phone as they crossed paths in the kitchen. "You didn't sleep much?" he asked without really asking. "Not really," she replied, pouring herself coffee. He nodded, distracted. "I'll be late tonight. Big presentation coming up." Clara smiled faintly. "Of course. Good luck." The same exchange they'd had 100 times before. Predictable, empty. She wanted to tell him about her car, about the ride, about Ethan, but something stopped her. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was the quiet voice in her head saying he won't listen anyway. The days that followed moved in slow motion. She went to work, came home, cooked dinner, and spent her evenings surrounded by silence. But inside she was restless. Ethan's voice kept echoing in her memory like a soft song. She couldn't turn off. She told herself to forget it. It was just a ride. Just a moment, but her heart had other plans. A week later, she saw him again. It was Friday afternoon, and she had just locked up the gallery. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet asphalt. As she turned toward the street, she saw a familiar car parked near the corner. Ethan was leaning against it, hands in his pockets, looking down at his phone. When he noticed her, he smiled. "I promise I'm not following you," he said with a small laugh. Clara's surprise turned into a laugh of her own. "You really have a way of showing up when I least expect it." He shrugged. "Maybe we're just on the same schedule." There was a pause, not awkward, but charged with something unspoken. Clara didn't know whether to walk away or stay. Ethan broke the silence. "Listen, about the other day. I wanted to apologize. What I said was probably out of line." Clara shook her head. "You don't have to apologize. You were just being kind." He studied her face, then said softly, "No, I was being honest." She looked away, unsure of what to say. Her heart thudded quietly in her chest. Ethan went on, his voice gentle. "I've seen the way Daniel works. He's dedicated, but sometimes people forget that love needs attention too. And when they forget, it hurts the people waiting for them." Clara's throat tightened. "You don't know our marriage," she said, but there was no anger in her tone, only sadness. "You're right," he said. "I don't, but I know what it looks like when someone feels unseen." She didn't reply. Instead, she looked at the wet street, at the reflection of lights on puddles. The truth was painful because it was familiar. Ethan stepped closer, just enough for her to feel his presence. "Clara, you deserve to be seen," he said quietly. "Not just looked at, but really seen." His words struck deep, too deep. She didn't know what scared her more, that he said it or that part of her wanted to believe him. "Ethan," she began, but her voice trailed off. He smiled faintly, like he already knew what she wanted to say. "Don't worry. I'm not trying to make things complicated. I just wanted you to know that, okay?" And then he left, just like that. He got in his car, waved softly, and drove away. Clara stood there for a long time, watching the car disappear into traffic. The evening air was cold, but she barely noticed. His words had filled her mind with something she hadn't felt in years, warmth mixed with guilt, comfort tangled with confusion. That night she sat on the couch, staring at the clock. Daniel was late again. She told herself it didn't matter, but deep down, it did. When he finally came home, he kissed her on the cheek without really looking at her. "Sorry," he said, loosening his tie. "We had another meeting run long." "It's okay," she said automatically. He went straight to the kitchen, grabbed leftovers, and started scrolling through his phone. The silence between them felt heavier than ever. After dinner, Clara sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Hope you got home safe." Her heart skipped. She stared at the message, not sure whether to reply. It wasn't romantic, not even suggestive, but it made her pulse quicken all the same. After a long pause, she typed back, "Thanks. I did. That was it." Just 2 short sentences. But they changed something inside her. Over the next few days, she thought about Ethan more than she wanted to admit. His honesty had awakened something, a reminder of what it felt like to be noticed, to be spoken to with care. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed that until now. One evening, She stayed late at the gallery to prepare for an upcoming exhibit. The city outside was alive with evening lights, and the faint sound of jazz music from a nearby cafe drifted through the air. She was rearranging frames when a voice behind her said, "Working late again?" She turned, startled. It was Ethan holding 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you could use one," he said, smiling. She hesitated, then smiled back. "You have good timing. You know that." "I try," he said lightly, handing her the cup. They talked for a while about art, life, little things that didn't matter and yet somehow did. With Ethan, words came easily. He listened, really listened, like every detail of her thoughts mattered. When she spoke about her work, he looked at her the way people do when they're genuinely interested, not just waiting for their turn to talk. It felt new. It felt right. At one point, Clara looked at him and said quietly, "You make it sound like you understand everything." He smiled. "Not everything, just loneliness." The room went quiet. There was no flirting, no lines, no wrong moves, just 2 people standing in a quiet space, recognizing something familiar in each other. Then Ethan stepped back and said gently, "I should go. You'll be fine from here." "Thank you," she said softly. As he left, Clara felt her chest tighten. She knew she shouldn't feel this way. She was married and she still loved Daniel, or at least the version of him she used to know. But something inside her was shifting, like a tide she couldn't stop. Later that night, she lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. Daniel was beside her, fast asleep. She turned her head and looked at him, the man she'd chosen. The man who had once been her whole world. She still remembered the early days, the laughter, the late-night drives, the way he used to hold her hand without thinking. Where had that gone? When had love turned into routine? Ethan's voice returned in her mind. "You deserve to be seen." Clara closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She wasn't in love with Ethan, she knew that. But he had reminded her of something she thought she had lost, the part of her that wanted to feel alive, valued, wanted. The next morning, she woke up early and stood by the window, watching the city come to life. Daniel was already gone, his coffee mug empty on the counter. She sighed, whispering to herself, "You deserve to be seen." Those words had become a mirror, painful but true. By the time she reached the gallery that day, she'd made a silent promise to herself. She wouldn't run away from her marriage, and she wouldn't cross any lines. But she also wouldn't keep pretending she was fine. Something had to change, either the silence between her and Daniel, or the life she was quietly losing inside it, as she arranged the new paintings on the wall. She caught her reflection in the glass, tired eyes, gentle smile. A woman rediscovering her own heart. For the first time in a long time, she whispered, "I still matter." But deep down, she knew Ethan's words weren't done with her yet. They would echo, linger, and pull at her heart until something in her story finally shifted for good. The days that followed were quiet, almost painfully so. Clara tried to focus on her work at the gallery, but her mind kept drifting. Every painting she hung, every frame she adjusted, seemed to mirror her thoughts. Fragments of color that once made sense, but now felt uncertain. Ethan hadn't texted or shown up again since that evening. Part of her was relieved. The other part missed him more than she wanted to admit. At home, things between her and Daniel were unchanged. They lived like 2 polite strangers sharing the same space. He was buried in his work, his eyes always fixed on the screen. Clara had stopped trying to compete with it. Some nights she would sit across from him at dinner, listening to the faint sound of the clock ticking, wondering when they had stopped talking about real things. One evening, Daniel looked up from his laptop and said, "You've been quiet lately." Clara smiled faintly. "You just noticed." He frowned, not catching the sadness in her tone. "I've been swamped with deadlines. It'll get better soon." "It's always soon, Daniel," she said softly. "When does soon actually come?" He looked at her then, surprised. For a moment, he seemed to see her, really see her. But just as quickly, the moment passed. He nodded absently and returned to his emails. Clara's heart sank. The next morning, she left for work earlier than usual. The city was still half asleep, and the mist hung low over the streets. She stopped at a coffee shop she hadn't visited in months. As she waited in line, she caught a reflection in the window behind her. Tall, dark hair, familiar posture. She turned, and there he was. Ethan. He smiled, almost shyly. "Clara, I thought that was you." She felt a rush of something, relief, surprise, maybe both. "You've been avoiding me," she said, trying to sound lighthearted. He chuckled softly. "I figured some distance would be good. Didn't want to make things complicated." "They already are," she said before she could stop herself. Ethan's expression softened. "Yeah," he whispered. "I guess they are." They got their coffee and sat near the window, the soft murmur of the cafe filling the space between them. For a while, they just talked about work, art, life, anything but the tension that hung quietly in the air. Then, in a moment of silence, Ethan spoke. "I didn't mean to cross a line that day, Clara, but what I said, I meant it." Clara looked down at her cup, her fingers tightening around it. "You mean when you said I deserve to be seen?" He nodded. "And when I said I wouldn't let you stand in the rain alone?" Her heart raced, but she didn't look up. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Okay, maybe not," he admitted. "But someone had to." Clara's eyes filled with tears she didn't expect. "You don't understand. I love my husband." "I do. But it feels like I'm the only one still trying." Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened the way Daniel used to long ago. "I wake up every day hoping he'll notice, hoping he'll ask how I'm doing. But it's like I'm invisible." She took a shaky breath. "And then you came along and said things that made me remember what it feels like to be alive." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You don't deserve to feel invisible, Clara." She looked at him then, his eyes steady, full of empathy. For a brief second, she wondered what might have been if life had introduced them under different circumstances. But she pushed the thought away. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I know," he said. "And I don't want to make you feel guilty. Just promise me something." "What?" "Don't let this," he gestured between them, "make you forget what you deserve. Talk to him. Make him see you again." Clara nodded, tears slipping down her cheek. "You always know what to say." Ethan smiled sadly. "That's because I've been where you are." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, frowned, and stood up. "I have to go." "But Clara," he hesitated. "You're stronger than you think." And just like that, he left. Clara sat there for a long time after he was gone. His words lingered like the last notes of a song she didn't want to end. But he was right. She needed to stop running from the truth. That night, Daniel came home late again. But instead of pretending everything was fine, Clara waited for him in the living room. When he walked in, she said quietly, "We need to talk." He froze, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "Okay," he said carefully. "What's wrong?" Clara took a breath. "Us. We're what's wrong. We live in the same house, but we barely see each other. You're always working, and I've stopped feeling like I matter to you." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Clara, that's not fair. It's honest," she interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm not angry, Daniel. I'm just tired. Tired of being the one holding everything together." He ran a hand through his hair, looking both guilty and lost. "I didn't realize you felt this way." "That's the problem," she said softly. "You didn't realize." Daniel sat down, silent for a moment. "Someone said something to me at work today." He finally said, "Ethan Blake." Clara's heart skipped. "Ethan." Daniel nodded. "He told me he'd seen you a few times, said he gave you a ride, that you were kind. And then he said something that hit me harder than I expected." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "What did he say?" Daniel looked at her with tired eyes. "He said I should start paying attention to my wife before someone else does." Clara's breath caught. She didn't know whether to feel shocked, angry, or grateful. "I didn't understand at first," Daniel continued quietly. "But when I got home and saw your face, I realized he was right. I've been so buried in work that I forgot to look up. I forgot to see you." Tears welled in her eyes, but she said nothing. Daniel stood and walked closer, hesitating before taking her hands. "Clara, I don't know how we got here, but I don't want to lose you. I want to fix this if you'll let me." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, she saw the man she fell in love with. The tired eyes, the sincerity, the guilt. He wasn't perfect, but he was still hers. "I want to fix it too," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The house felt different that night. Not healed, but hopeful. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began to change. He came home earlier, asked about her day, joined her at the gallery's small events. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, just quiet, genuine effort. One Saturday, he surprised her with a visit to the coast. They walked along the beach, the wind tangling her hair, the sea stretching endlessly before them. Daniel reached for her hand and said, "I forgot how much I missed this." Clara smiled through tears. "Me too." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she realized something important. Love doesn't fade because of distance. It fades because of silence. And sometimes it takes another person's honesty to wake you up. Weeks later, Clara was closing the gallery when she found a small envelope on the front desk. No name, just her own, written in neat handwriting. Inside was a note, "I'm glad he finally saw you. Take care of that light inside you." She read it twice, her eyes blurring with emotion. There was no sadness this time, only peace. She knew she wouldn't see Ethan again, and that was okay. He had walked into her life for a reason, to remind her of something she had forgotten about herself. That night, as she and Daniel sat on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder, she felt something new, not the excitement of first love, but the warmth of love rediscovered. And yet, sometimes, when she drove across the bridge on her way to work, she would think of Ethan, the rain against the window, his calm voice, the look in his eyes when he said, "If I were him, I'd never let you stand in the rain alone." Those words no longer hurt. They lived quietly inside her, like a lesson, because sometimes the people who don't stay are the ones who remind us how to hold on to what truly matters. Clara smiled softly at the thought, whispering into the quiet car, "Thank you, Ethan." Then she turned up the radio, the city lights glimmering ahead, and drove home, not to the life she used to have, but to the one she had finally learned to love again.